مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين، محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum. Sheikh Arif, my respected brothers and sisters. It's a bit of a surprise. I was hoping to hear Sheikh Arif before I had to say something. But nonetheless, here I am from the Bohra community. And I was quite provoked yesterday by at least the first half of this session and a whole bunch of other things. So let me just start by introducing myself a little bit, because I think we can all identify with each other how we have come here in Canada and where we stand today. I was born in Karachi, and from infancy, my neighbors, who happened to be a childless Sunni couple, kind of adopted me because they had no children, and my parents were generous enough to share my birth with them. So I kind of grew up in two households. I was lovingly cared for by whom I called uncle and auntie, but now I realize they were kind of like my godparents. That was a Sunni household. My parents were very ardent Bohra Muslims, and of course I lived there with my parents, but I spent most of my daytime upstairs with my uncle and auntie. And we had mutual respect for each other's faith. It never ever occurred to me that they were any different than my parents in terms of the love they gave me, in terms of their values and culture. So in my psyche, I had this ingrained unity between at least something that has kind of become controversial, unfortunately, today. Then I started school, and it was kind of funny. I went to a Habib school in Karachi, which was run by Shia administration, but the students were mainly Sunnis, and this maybe a 60-40 split. What was kind of funny was that I didn't realize that I was a Shia at that point, because Bohras have a very weird way of doing things. We have fixed calendars, we know when our Eid is, we know when the Ashura is, when Arafah Day is. So I was kind of shy because my Eid never fell on multiple other days when other people were celebrating Eid. And I was always wondering what kind of Muslims we were. It wasn't until grade 7 that, to my sheer joy and delight, I realized that I was part of the Shia group. My God, I was part of a bit of a larger whole. I felt like I belonged to a lot more people than I originally thought. Then that wasn't enough. After metric, we immigrated. My parents immigrated to Canada. I was a troubled teenager at that time. And all of a sudden, I was completely surrounded by non-believers. You know, these beer-drinking, pork-eating kafirs or whatever, and they were so nice. You know, they treated me really well, almost as good as the Habib school kids, even better. They told me about their country. They made it easier for me to adjust in a really cold, new environment. They even, showed real interest in my background, and they wanted to learn about my cultural heritage. So I said, our Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is, Rahman and Rahim, surely is not going to send all these wonderful people to hell. So I wanted a larger perspective, and in my rebellion, I just abandoned all religious belief for a while. And this short kind of rebellion refocused me as I graduated from university and started to have a life with a wife and children, I refocused on my Bohra origins, and I became actually quite increasingly involved more and more with my community and my roots. And I found myself that by affirming my faith in, yesterday Sheikh Arif said that people from Zanzibar are very exclusive. Well, you guys should try being a Bohra. You will see. It's fine. What's really important, though, is not what you are. It's how you treat others. And I think that's the message I want to leave. And the reason I gave you my background is because that's what has made me what I am today. It has cemented my existence. That word, existence. You defined as what we see and what we feel. That's existence. And it's evolutionary, right? It goes from simple to complex. So this is the only part where I will reverse the direction and we will try to go from complex to simple. Sheikh Arif, you gave a really wonderful example of the human brain as being the most evolved, complicated, and most beautiful example of Allah's creation. So that brain causes diversity. It causes us to become different people. I'll give you an example. A lot of us believe in Panjat and Pak, the 5 fingers. So let's say this one is the Bohra finger. This is the Ismaili finger, the Ishnashiri finger, the Sunni finger, the Ahmadi finger. But we don't realize that they all belong to the same hand, the Muslim hand. And each finger is different for a reason. They all have a purpose to serve. And they all work together. If you cut one off, it's not going to be as effective. Then you take the Muslim hand and the Christian hand and the Jewish leg and the Hindu leg, and you get a body. And the body works together if all 4 things are working in harmony and synchronization. So from my heart, not the brain, but the heart, I would like to say that unity amongst not just Muslims, but all faiths makes humanity function and work much more efficiently, in harmony, and much more, in my opinion, beautifully. And that's all I have to say tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I was not prepared to give this talk, and it's a bit, I don't know how to say. I'm really happy to be here and to see and follow the presentations of Sheikh Arif. They are very impressive, as even the Ithna Ashari philosophy of Islam is really impressive. As Sister Fatima said, my name is Olsi Azeji. I'm originally from Albania, southeastern Europe. I'm also a Sunni Muslim, but I do very much follow and try to understand the other schools of Islam. And as a historian that I am by training, I always try to understand and figure out why Muslims nowadays are so much divided as we are. The region where I come from, which is southeastern Europe, otherwise known as Balkans, once upon a time was a region that was highly Islamized. Muslims were living from Hungary to Serbia to Croatia to Bulgaria to Romania, etc. But for the last 100 or 200 years, as a result of the continuous defeats of the Ottoman Muslim Empire, Muslims have been ethnically cleansed from southeastern Europe. Southeastern Europe, in a way, is half of Europe. And very often here in the West, when people talk about the culture, the roots of the West, etc., quite often they ignore that Europe, until 200 years ago, half of it was Muslim. Major cities that we have nowadays in southeastern Europe, from Budapest to Belgrade to Athens in Greece, etc., once upon a time were inhabited by Muslims. But what happened to Muslims in the last 300 years is that our communities have continuously disappeared from the map of Europe. And nowadays we have Muslim communities surviving only in Kosovo, Albania, parts of Macedonia, and parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, the region where I come from during the times of the Ottoman Empire was very diverse, religiously speaking. Apart from Orthodox and Catholic Christians, we had Muslims who were Sunnis, and we had even many Shias, and many groups which derived from the Shias, tariqats like the Bektashiya, etc., who had their peers and sheikhs coming from the lands of Iran. And these themes of Shi'i theology, with the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, etc., are part of the culture of many nations in Southeastern Europe. By the way, one of the most famous poets of Albanian nationalism, his name is Naim Frashëri, wrote many beautiful poems about the Battle of Karbala, about the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, and so forth. And I'm really delighted to be here and to follow the lectures of Sheikh Arif. They are very inspiring, and I have to admit, even though I come from a Sunni background, the transmission of the Shi'i, or otherwise how people in Iran, where I go quite often, like to call themselves of the Jafari madhab. They are very rich and very exciting, and I believe that we, as Sunnis, have a lot to learn from our Shia brothers. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin wa ashabihi al-muntajibin. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The verse states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. Now, this is the verse that encapsulates the whole theory that we will present today. Yesterday, we spoke of the current model of ijtihad and taqleed, which we need to recap. We stated the whole issue of taklif, i.e. burdening, imposing responsibility upon a faithful in itself necessitates ijtihad and taqleed. Ijtihad is a way of finding out what is that burden, what are those responsibilities. And taqleed is a manner of executing or discharging that taklif in an acceptable way and adequately. The paradigm in which ijtihad and taqleed operate at present and taklif is that in the mind of God. I've been asked not to use the word mind of God because people normally associate him with a face and then with hands and feet. So in the knowledge of God, and of course you don't see the funny side in things that I say, do you? You never do. Salawat, please. Do bear in mind I'm a Maulana, yes? I can switch into a majlis form at any point without any warning, yes? So if you look enthusiastic, then it just spurs me on a little bit more, okay? No shaking of the heads at all, only nodding of the heads. So the paradigm, the framework in which taklif is seen at present is that in the knowledge of God, there are absolutes. What this means is that we are creating a world that is a stagnant world. It's a world that is not moving. And therefore, in taklif, we have absolute taklifs. The age of 9 is an absolute cutoff point for girls, in which they are vested with responsibility. For boys, the age of 13, there is no distinction in that, there is no fluctuation. And 2, the taklif that comes upon a girl, it comes lock, stock and barrel at the age of 9, upon the boys at the age of 13. The law of inheritance is 2 shares for a male as opposed to 1 share for a female. In the case of witnessing, 2 women to 1 man. And I think that probably is an immutable law. You can never trust what women say. In fact, if anything, with evolution, I think there should be 4 women to 1 man. But unfortunately, it runs contrary to my own theory, so we'll explore that now. So the mindset is that these duties are firm and fixed. What this means is that the world of God is a stagnant place. It's not fluctuating, it's not growing. Now, due to this mindset of taklif, this then influences the whole process of ijtihad. Ijtihad therefore presumes, current day model of ijtihad presumes that there are absolutes in the mind of God or in the knowledge of God. And therefore the whole method is geared towards appreciation of what is there in the knowledge of God absolutely. And therefore we resort to texts in which God explains His intent, or the hadith that clarify the Quran of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which leads us to a very literalistic, pedantic interpretation of the words of God, so we can be sure that we have understood what God means. And what this means is an apparent understanding of the intent of God. Based on that, then we have an adequate discharge of responsibility by either knowing in a very literalistic sense what is the intention of God, either ourselves, or emulating or imitating somebody else and their view based on the rational principle, as we will explain in just a little while, of making reference to the one who knows as an adequate means of discharge of this duty. Now, if you look at these 3, responsibility, which brings about the whole process of deriving the intent of God from the text that is applying, and the whole issue of discharge of duty, they are squarely based on an understanding that nothing changes. Now, it does not mean that it is not value-based. Adaliyah or the Imamiyah or the 12 Shia, like the Mu'tazila, they all state that the duties imposed by God or the responsibilities are value-based. There has to be some value in whatever Allah says. So if God says, do not consume pig, it means that doesn't mean that pig is a bad animal. It means the pig's relation with the human being is not a very good one. There is negative impact on the consumption of pig. So they admit this. Or when God says, devote, pray, it means that there is some value in there. However, it is left at that there is some value, and hence, theoretically, Allah is imposing upon us these obligations or responsibilities. However, that is all that it says. It is not looking at these values beyond immediate gains. It has no sense of anything beyond itself. What I mean to say is, it does not look at these values within the evolutionary existential context that we were talking of yesterday. Now, in this way, even the secularist societies formulate the whole system of rights, responsibilities based on values. But they too do not have any sense of any spiritual growth in the evolutionary sense. They have a sense that these are valuable. This is the way human beings ought to be. Religion talks about spirituality in addition to that, but not in an evolutionary sense. None of these systems are talking about spiritual, purposeful existence, which is evolutionary, taking us from one place and our existence culminating in another glorious state. So what I'm trying to say here is that the current model, the framework or the paradigm in which we are operating, even though it talks of values, and it talks of spiritual values, but it does not talk of an evolutionary trend, or they are not set within an evolutionary framework. The whole issue of responsibilities is also spoken of within the secular system, and valuable responsibilities or value-based responsibilities. But there again, there is no mention of spirituality nor of the spiritual or the evolutionary trend. That is what we stated yesterday. Then we spoke of the existential framework. What do we mean by existential framework? What we mean here is that the way in which human beings are is very, very important. The way in which human beings are, which we will call the human condition, has to be in line with the properties of existence at large. And the human condition has to be rooted within existence properly and firmly. And that has to be understood and acknowledged. When we look at existence, there are one or two things we want to cover here at a theoretical level and maybe repeat certain lectures that we have given in LA. If we look at existence, existence is always moving. There is no stagnation in existence. It is dynamic. It is not merely dynamic, it is evolutionary. So it is dynamic in the vertical sense. It is evolutionary. What it means that it is evolutionary is, what we mean by existence being evolutionary is that it is flowing from simplicity into complexity, from weakness into strength. Whether the strength lies within itself potentially or is supplied to it externally, we are not in a position to make a final judgment on that. But what we see at present is that a seed buried inside the earth, provided that the physical situation is there to allow the seed to grow, the seed would immediately germinate and then become a young plant, become a tree, bear fruits. This is the evolutionary cycle of a seed. And then it will bear fruit and procreate. Yes? Similarly, a fetus. Similarly, the solar system, the Milky Way, the whole of the physical or five-dimensional universe in which me and you exist. Everything follows this singular trend of evolution, from weakness into strength, from simplicity into complexity, where it is constantly elaborating itself and coming to a newer, glorious state of self-realization, of growth, and of existence. Now, if this is the case, then a religion has to be based in essence upon this existential feature of existence at large and the human condition. Otherwise, it would not be successful. Similarly, and there are one or two delicate points here that we need to deal with. We find this trend within the faith systems of this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maintains very clearly that the deen has always been one. Means of devotion to the principles. This is how I define deen. Means of devotion to the growth principles. Yes, and we'll define it in a little while. Furthermore, we'll fine-tune it. Has always been one. But it has had different expressions at different times. Judaism, Christianity, Islam. But it's just been one. It has been on the vertical trend. And as soon as the human community comes of age, it's tweaked a little, changed a little to accommodate that growth further. And this deen has always had in itself the salient features of growth that have always been the same, but they have been refashioned as the time has gone on. What we're trying to say here is that a religion can only be successful if it is based on this evolutionary nature of existence generally. And it then directs the human being in accordance with that. Now, as a human community, when we evolve and we grow, through this moral conscience that we have, we stipulate a system of rights of others within the social context. That we are burdened with rights, we are burdened with responsibilities. It's an existential thing. Even if religion were not to have informed us of this, the human condition in itself would stipulate it. Today in the secularist society, even though historically we've been religious people and religion has inspired us, but had there not been any religion within our human condition, we would have found it necessary to bring about a system of rights and responsibilities. The secular societies of today even they are cut off from religion and they're distancing themselves from religion, but still there's a sense of rights and responsibilities and duties upon one and all in order to ensure a proper functioning of the human community, which is purposeful. The purpose may not be spiritual within a secularist context, but yet it leads to a good life, which is the purpose at present within the secular world. So for a religion to be successful, the religion has to be in sync with the property of existence and the human condition of growth. So now, if that is the case, then let us discuss the general properties of existence as we go into this subject. The properties of existence are that it is always flowing from simplicity into complexity, from weakness into strength. And at every point, we formulate rules, regulations, responsibilities to allow for that vertical trend of growth and self-fulfillment. Even though we do not understand within the secular system and in our religious system that there is a vertical trend, but it leads inadvertently to the vertical trend. So there is a vertical trend of growth from weakness into strength. However, there is another trend as well, the horizontal trend. You see, today, let's give an example. On the roads in Ontario, we can only drive to a certain speed limit, can't we? But I know that I can drive twice as fast and keep my machine in control, my car under control. However, the law system will not allow me. Why? Because at the horizontal level, we are social beings and the law has to be based on the lowest common denominator. What is the speed that can be handled by the majority of the people? And that will be the speed that is imposed upon one and all. And this is how we bring about uniformity. And so therefore, existence has this vertical trend of revealing itself, evolving, but at the same time, it creates a horizontal trend because different things evolve at different rates. When it comes to the human condition, because human beings are social animals and social creatures, they live in groups. So we find two things. We find different regions evolving at different rates. And these different regions evolving at different rates will formulate rules and regulations and responsibilities for themselves in accordance with what works for the majority. Here we have therefore the vertical trend and the horizontal trend. The horizontal trend brings about relativity, and within that relativity there is uniformity. So we have the vertical trend, we have the horizontal trend. The horizontal trend is created by relativity, different things evolving at different rates, and because of the condition of the humans as a social condition, there has to be uniformity in that relativity at the horizontal level. These are the existential principles that we need to use for this discussion. In addition with two more. One is that there is a system of gradation. That even in one individual, there are different levels of evolution. And two, there is no finality. Now, if we were to take that into consideration, then we will, and we apply to ahkam, what that would mean is that the ahkam have to fall in line with the vertical, in the sense that they are always promoting growth. Yes, they are designed to promote growth. And two, they fall into the horizontal. They are relativistic for different times and different regions. Even on the horizontal, for different regions, they are different. And within that, they are uniform in catering for groups of people which are sharing the particular location and particular region. And two, we have to admit that there is no absolute in the knowledge of God. The knowledge of God allows for this fluctuation, in the sense that we will not give a textbook to a child that will serve the need of the child within the kindergartens and when they graduate. The knowledge of God has to be similar. That at this stage, this is what is right for you. At this stage, this is right for you. At this stage, this is right for you. So what happens is that God has to supply us with newer instructions all the time. But God is not doing that, and therefore God has to create mechanism within the ahkam that allow for newer interpretations. This is what I call the evolutionary flux, that God's intent is always different in accordance with the rate of evolution and growth and self-realization. Now here comes a problem. Before we begin to apply this, you might ask, well, how do we know that we can adequately subscribe to this sort of a theory? Of course, examples have to be given. But the first thing I say is, well, we can look at it intuitively. When you press me further, I don't want to go into elaborate philosophical discussions into the nature of intuition, but we have to cover it somehow. What do you mean by intuitively? Well, I'll give an example. The Quran is called the reminder, isn't it? Remind them. And it's also known as dhikr, the reminder. Why is Quran called the reminder? What is it reminding us of? I mean, many people say, well, I don't remember the pledge I made to God. Where is that pledge? Even if you remind me, I don't remember. Can you see that? It means that we have misunderstood it. I mean, the Quran is quite emphatic. Alam a'ahdu ilaykum ya bani Adam an la ta'budu shaitan. Have I not made, did I not have a covenant with you that you will not worship shaitan? I don't know when he made this covenant with me. You are listening to the shaitan, aren't you? And I don't mean me. I'm talking about the talk inside your heads right now. Or people saying in the Quran, Allah saying, يَوْمَ يَتَذَكَّرَ الْإِنسَانُ وَأَنَّ لَهُ ذِكْرًا, the day in which the human being remembers, and to what good will his remembrance be on that day? Or the people saying in the Quran, or Allah, people saying in the Quran, oh Lord, we now see clearly, we hear clearly, send us back so that we can do righteous deeds. Allah says, no, we would have given everybody their guidance had we wanted to. But we chose otherwise because of the pledge. Now, what does that mean? When the Prophet said that he is an outer prophet who has come to awaken the inner prophet, and when Quran calls itself the reminder, the Prophet came in and said, do you know what? Don't cheat people. And people said, oh, that makes sense. So why were you cheating each other? Well, we became oblivious to what we knew. But now we remember. What do you remember? Did anybody tell you this before? No, we know it. We already know it, that we can't cheat people. That's what I mean by intuition. So remembrance means what? Becoming mindful of what we already know. That is the meaning of remembrance. Of becoming mindful of whatever we already know. Because I can say, well, yes, my mother told me this. Well, say, well, even if your mother told you this, how do you know it's right? The very fact that you can predicate that whatever the Prophet is saying is the truth shows that you've already made that judgment. How did you make that judgment? You cannot have made that judgment if it is not already vested inside you. You already know the truth. It's a question of becoming mindful. So reminder does not mean, oh yes, you told me this and now I remember. But that doesn't mean anything. But when you told me this in the first place, it didn't make sense. And now I remember that it never made sense in the first place. Can you see that? What Plato said was accurate to a great extent. That we never learn anything. We merely recollect. It was very accurate in some senses. So when the Prophet said, do not bury your daughters alive, they said, you know what, that makes sense. But who told you this? Regardless of who told us this, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense within itself. We know. Now I ask, what is the basis of this knowledge? The basis of this knowledge is nothing but our existential condition. Whatever is productive, whatever yields becomes right. Whatever is counterproductive becomes wrong. That is intuition. So when I say that these are the existential principles, and this is how a religion has to fashion itself for it to be successful, the question comes, how do we know that this is the right thing? The answer is, it's intuitive. What does intuition mean? It's the human condition. What does the human condition mean? This is the way existence is. What does that mean? It is evolving. Anything that is productive is right. Anything that assures growth, evolution, self-realization is right within itself and does not need any more proof. That is the whole basis of what and this humble creature of God is saying. I've just been reminded that I've stopped using the word humble creature, and I'm starting to become arrogant, so I'll revert to the humble creature thing again, yes? You know, the sort of stares that you're giving me could kill, so lighten up. Now, religion, in this way, let us just remind ourselves of the LA lectures, and then we go into it. Now, religion, with the classical sort of categorization, is composed of theology, which is the theory, morality, which is the end goal, and ahkam, which are rights and responsibilities and duties. Yes? The theology gives a sense of the lofty goal that we need to achieve. That's the theology part of it, the theory part of the religious teachings. Morality is the end goal, what we need to become in the journey of life. Ahkam and responsibilities, which constitute the taklif that we have, are a means towards the achievement of morality. So the least is the ahkam. And if the human condition is an evolutionary one, then the ahkam must always fluctuate in the vertical and the horizontal in order to ascertain that self-realization, which is the second thing. Now, what is religion, therefore, in this scheme of categorization? Religion is only God-human connection in the vertical evolutionary trend, where God marks that absolute point of aspiration towards completion and self-realization. Simultaneously, God is that intimate process leading from weakness to strength, from potentiality to self-realization. So religion is a mere expression of placing God-human relationship within that vertical axis, where God serves dual purpose, the absolute point of culmination of human glory and the intimate process towards that absolute completion. And ahkam is a vehicle towards that self-realization. Now, I made this tried to make this clear in LA, that when we talk about morality within the religious system, it is not good for the sake of good. It is good for the sake of becoming complete human beings. And that is what I termed as spiritual morality. Because a devotional system presumes an intimate connection with God, where the individual surrenders, and as they surrender, they begin to break their own limitations. As they begin to break their limitations, they begin to become God-like. They begin to mirror God within themselves. As we explained, the prophets and the Imam, it was a beautiful state of reconciliation of human frailties in that beautiful divinity. So the end goal has always been what? To become God-like, spiritually moral. Not goodness for the sake of goodness, but goodness for the sake of self-realization. Self-realization means shedding our own limits and becoming God-like, beautifully complete, resembling God, a state of saintliness that you see before your very eyes. And the ahkam have to take into consideration the evolution of the individual in the context of an individual in the social context, in an evolutionary trend. If we have got that, and if that is clear, then we will say the ahkam, the state of responsibility, rights, and whatever else you have there, is a form. The essence is that lofty purpose to which we need to reach, and that whole process of self-realization, that is the essence. The forms will change and fluctuate in order for the attainment of that essence. If that has gone through, then we will now discuss and describe the ahkam system before we go into the new model that we wish to suggest and prove and give some examples of it. The ahkam therefore have to be sufficiently vague and ambiguous in order to allow this process of being re-evaluated within the evolutionary trend or axis, both vertically and horizontally vertically. Yes? If you look at the Quran is very vague when it comes to ahkam. There are minimalistic laws within the Quran. Yes? Minimalistic. And they are vague. It talks about prayer, but does not say how to pray. It talks about sujood and ruku, but that's about it. Yes? It talks about wudu, but does not talk about the direction of washing. It was purposely meant to create this variety of readings, because that is the human condition. There is plurality. We all think differently, we all read differently, we all digest differently, in order to allow for that charm of plurality. It was deliberately done that way. Zakat is mentioned in the Quran. The amount has not been mentioned, has it? It's just a zakat. It's one of the most fundamental laws of the Quran. But why was zakat mentioned in the Quran in the first place? Because the state, as a state, has its needs that it has to serve. Any state needs a form of taxation, doesn't it? And no state can have a hard and fast universal law of what the taxation should be, or the percentage of taxation. Yes? Earning tax, income tax, whatever we have. No state can give a firm, uniform, universal law that from the time of Adam till the end of the world, this will be the taxation system and this will be the percentage. Quran has been very mindful of that. And it has left it as zakat and not spoken of it. And in instances where the Quran has stipulated laws, it has given reasons or the restrictions due to which it has to stipulate the law in that way. For example, it talks about two women witnesses to one male witness, and I looked at the women and I said two female witnesses. There's always a bias in the male mind, right? So it says one male witness, and if you can't find another one, then take two female witnesses so that if one were to forget, the other one will remind her. So it's giving a reason there that women are people who cannot retain knowledge accurately. You know, this is why we need two women witnesses, because you could have just paused for a minute and I would have explained. Seriously, now I believe the Quran is right. It's immutable and universal. What used to happen back in the days in that context, men were the people who were responsible for retaining knowledge and this oral transmission. If we read Surah An-Nisa, we will find how the Arabs used to treat women. They used to kill their man and inherit the women. Women were kept childlike. They were never allowed to develop their skills of retention of knowledge. And the Quran is very pragmatic. And in that context, it says, well, these women cannot retain knowledge accurately. It does not mean that the Quran would say the same thing today in the Western developed sort of an environment. So it was pointing it out. It was pointing out this disparity in the law and the reason why. Does that make more sense now? You could have just been silent. And the inheritance law. The Quran talks about in Surah An-Nisa the law of inheritance. Now we know that the Quran sees that women as carers and men as providers. Allah says, بِمَا فَضَّلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That الرِّجَالْ قَوَّمُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. That men have some form of predominance above women in terms of the capabilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given one over the other. The women were not required to earn livelihood. So they were always supported. And therefore the inheritance that came to them was their saving. Yes? Whereas the man had to provide, so whatever that it came to them, they had to spend. That was the model that the Quran used. But if the Quran is to be pragmatic and were to come in today's society where the women are carers and providers, then obviously it would have been stated differently. This is what I'm trying to say, that either God has left the ahkam ambiguous, or He has firmly fixed them, but given a context. And that context brings to mind the reason why God had to fix it in that way. So these ahkam have to be sufficiently vague, or they have to have an element within them that allows for this dynamism, so that they can be interpreted interpreted and re-evaluated within the evolutionary, vertical and the horizontal trends. Two, what this suggests is that there is a total state of flux. There are no absolutes. Just as this beautiful universe of ours is expanding, unfolding, revealing itself afresh moment by moment. There are many things in the universe that we feel are the way in which they are, until the paradigm shifts and we will find that we have a reinterpretation of everything. Yes? Today we know now that the things that we see as they are may not be as they are. According to quantum mechanics, anything can happen. Anything is possible. Yes? In the same way, the ahkam have to follow the same nature of existence. God's knowledge is not how we presume it to be. God's knowledge of how we ought to be and what we ought to do and ought not to do and rights and responsibilities has to be as evolutionary, in flux as the whole existence is. Now if anybody says, well, if God doesn't know absolutes and whatnot, that's another theological issue. We will I'm just going to point this out. We will then at that point talk of the principle of the absolute presence of God and the presence of universe, where this problem is resolved and fully dissolved. Now we'll go into examples in just a little while. If all of this has gone through and makes sense, then the situation that was intended from the very beginning was this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives minimalistic laws and allows humanity through its own experiences to formulate other laws around them in order to allow it to best accommodate its needs, create a working community that is fulfilled and it's on the evolutionary track, and has given scope for failure and to learn from that failure. When people say, why is the 12th Imam in occultation? I'll say that's the greatest mercy, because there was a father that was holding the child's hand and not letting the child fall. The rightest thing for a father to do was to let go, so that the child may fall and learn to stand. Walk, then learn to run. The greatest favor a father can do for a child is to let them learn and come of age. Otherwise, what was the purpose of this existence if we were not to learn, not to evolve, and not to reach a pedestal of human glory? So the whole intent was this, that the laws be minimalistic, have dynamism within them, have dynamics within them that can make them, that can allow for this re-evaluation at every point based on certain principles of growth. Now I don't have the time to explain those principles of growth and how everything else varies, but we'll just give an example of the human condition. Quran never talks about an economical system. It just talks about fair play and justice and says formulate it yourselves. Yes? So we come out with a capitalistic model, socialistic model, so on and so forth. Yes? And we see, okay, this failed, we learn from the experiences here, we try it out again. This one, we need to tweak it here, tweak it there, this fails, do this, so long as those principles or fair play and justice is assured. Quran never has given us a model of social system. We had feudalism, monarchy, capitalism, socialism, so on and so forth. Yes? It just gives those salient principles that assure growth and says to the human being, you with your own experiences. This is the charm of human life, that whatever you stipulate for yourselves is to be honored. And in fact, we have room for that within the Sharia. There's a hadith of Ali ibn Abi Talib, salamullah alayhi, in which he states that Allah has given the do's and the don'ts, and Allah has remained silent. Don't press God for answers in that area. He has given you discretion. In family law, the rules are minimalistic. Minimalistic, absolutely. The domestic atmosphere has, or the domestic context has the full discretion to govern their lives in a meaningful way. And they are not hard and fast laws. They can change all the time. This is how the system was intended to be, with no finality and perfect confidence that whatever we are doing, which falls within the vertical and suits the people within this community, is acceptable by God and is the intention of God. There is nothing that is immutable. Everything can change with the changing of our evolution. Now, in the light of this, what should ijtihad look like? From a model of literalistic, pedantic interpretation of texts to find out the intent of God based on the understanding that God has absolute intent for one and all at the horizontal level and for one and all at the vertical level, from Adam or from the Prophet of Islam till Al-Mahdi or till Qiyamah. Yes? Whole of humanity and every region. Based on that presumption, it will be moved to the newer framework, which is one of evolution and flux. So what is the intention of God from human life? To lead the life in the most meaningful way that assures growth and is fair and righteous. So now, if we give an example, we will say that if we have an issue, and we will discuss with it in a little while, for example, the issue of euthanasia. It is not a question of a particular person reading the religious texts and coming out with the notion of the sacredness of life and life to be sustained and prolonged at all costs. It would be a question at that point of bringing together the best of minds, philosophers, atheists, medics, a mujtahid, people from the care profession. They put their minds together. A philosopher will talk about the whole issue of suffering and death, or suffering and human growth. Yes? The economist will talk about the resources and the human community. All of these minds have to come together and stipulate the right course of action. And that is a far realistic model. And that should be the model with the principle of no finality and evolutionary flux, that if by tomorrow circumstances change and we have evolved further, then that would become outdated, and or there is an ever renewal process of ijtihad. In commerce, you will have different minds coming together. Issue of commerce. In family law, we have different minds coming together. That is how ijtihad should be, because the human being is a holistic being. We cannot only look at the text and try and derive the intent of God. We have to look at the human being in the broadest context, in which the mujtahid in the traditional sense will be one feature of it. Not the exclusive part, not the authoritative part, but one of many others who come together. That is how ijtihad should look. Now you might say, well, what about what we have been accustomed to? Now what we've been accustomed to of taqleed and ijtihad is something alien to what is really suggested by the Book of God and the tradition of the Prophet. What is suggested by the Book of God is reference to one who knows. And that is our human condition. Because when we don't know something, we will refer to somebody who does know something. That is the only thing the Book of God talks of. And that is an existential principle, and that is the human condition. We don't need to be told this, we already know this. That if I don't know something, I will refer to somebody who does know. Yes? It's a rational thing, derived from intuition, which is our human condition, which is in line with the general properties of existence. The whole of this issue of a mujtahid being, and by the way, this group that does ijtihad will be the point of reference. The whole issue of mujtahid being a male is alien to the rational principle and to the texts. We can't substantiate this neither from the Quran nor from the tradition of the Prophet or the Imam. And at most what we can say is that it was a social need. I'm going to look further into this inheritance and other things and to say how this ijtihad should conduct itself, yes? For him to be alive again is alien. There is no such thing as living. It's based on the understanding of what taqleed means and somebody bearing the yoke of responsibility. It's an offshoot of that presumption. But if the research is there, for example, we stated yesterday that one of the conditions for the necessity of imitation was that we cannot, with confidence, commit ourselves to an act with the claim that this is something desired by God without first proving that this is desired by God. You remember yesterday's discussion. Tabatabai Yazdi stated that in the a'mal, a person has to either be a mujtahid or a muqallid. Otherwise, those a'mals are not executed accurately. Why? When a person is a mujtahid, they have legitimately inferred the responsibility from its text and they know this is the intent of God. And the laity, they failing to have that competence, will then refer to somebody who has done their research. Because person A, who has not conducted any research, cannot with confidence say that I am praying this prayer as desired by God, because it can be asked of that person, well, how do you know this has been desired by God? And there is no knowledge base, so therefore the whole act is null and void. We stated there yesterday, that the accuracy of an act is based on its existential properties, not on intentions. If the salah brings about greater existence within the human being, then that salah has been accepted. And no matter how much taqleed we do, if the salah does not bring about reform within the individual, it's not accepted. Yes? Just as contracts. Traditionally, the contracts were conducted in Arabic language. Today, we go to the shop owner and we merely give the dollar and we take the product. The transfer of ownership states that this is a valid transaction. We don't have to do taqleed. In fact, they don't see the necessity of doing taqleed in transactions. We don't have to do taqleed or make any intentions or say anything. The efficacy of the method is proven by the effect of the method. If it is productive, if it does what it's designed to do, then it's working and it is acceptable. Yes? So the mujtahid does not have to be alive, and there is no evidence proving that. Does not have to be one, and none of those conditions are central for the person or the place where reference needs to be made. These were all social considerations of the time. Yes? The only one consideration that is rational, the first one that is rational is reference to the one who knows. That's rationally based. The other rational is the one who knows the most. That is a consideration that is absolutely rational. That we will go to the one who knows most accurately, yes? If, for example, we have a life-threatening situation, reason will impel us to go to the one who knows best about that condition. Rationally, we will do that. That is the only condition, in addition to making reference to the learned, we have to say making reference to the one who is most educated in that issue. And that in itself will presume an ijtihad model which brings together the collective intellect, and that too is subject to evolution. Yes? That is what we are saying the ijtihad model should look like. The mujtahid within themselves, or that particular collective mind, will take into consideration evolution and gradation. What do we mean by this? And we want to explain it in a little while again. That, for example, you can't, within the human condition, have one point where the person becomes wholly responsible for every duty. In fact, the Quran makes provision for this. It talks about nikah for males. It talks about hulm, and it talks about rushd. It talks about 3 different concepts. And it's not stipulating any age for when a boy or a girl becomes baligh. So the ijtihad should take into consideration this gradational nature. The Quran talks about the state of bulugh and nikah, where things become obligatory, but still says to people, restrain the wealth of the yatim until you sense prudentiality from them, and then hand them their money. What that means is that the responsibility to handle their own financial affairs has not come upon them. They don't have that sense. They're not prudential. Therefore, restrain their money even though they're baligh. Give it to them when they acquire this sense. It would also take into consideration the relativity that is in the world, in different regions. You might find that in the remote jungles of Amazon, the only way to curtail crime is to chop the 4 fingers or the 5 fingers off. But in other regions, we will find that maybe rehabilitation, imprisonment, so on and so forth might work better. The essence is what? Spiritual morality of the individual and the community. The ahkam are forms that fluctuate. So this ijtihadi model, which brings in the collective intellect, will have to take into consideration the evolutionary, gradational nature of the human condition and the horizontal relativity into consideration as well. And we have provisions of that in Islam, and I don't have the time to explain the universal cultures of Hajj and its like, and particular cultures of different groupings that make the ummah as an ummah. Taqleed. So ahkam fluctuate. Ijtihad model has to consist of the best of minds that can look at the human condition in a holistic sense, as individual and as a collective body, bearing in mind its evolution, its gradation, its horizontal gradation, and the groupings that are there. So for example, when we get a law, that law is uniform, yes? And I'll come to it in a minute, but I'll just give this sense that, for example, Imam Sadiq Salamullah alayh was asked, when does a girl become baligh? He said at the age of 13 or when she menstruates, which is in conflict with what was asserted earlier on. Why did this happen? Because the lifestyle had changed, their diet had changed, their social circumstances had changed, which had affected them physiologically. And he was bearing that in mind. When Imam Sadiq himself changes the goalpost, it says something, doesn't it? And we'll go into further examples. So he was mindful of this evolutionary trend. And of course, I'm saying in addition to that, we have this gradation of responsibilities as well. And what about taqleed? What model should this ijtihadi model give for emulation and imitation? Now this is what I believe firmly, that the laws of God have always been minimalistic. They have been absolute principles, and they have left the onus of responsibility upon individuals and groups of individuals, so that they take responsibility for action and they grow through them. There was never supposed to be a state of fine-tuned ahkam for every single thing. The greater space was the discretionary space up for the individual, where the individuals themselves decide their course of action. So this model of ijtihad that will then give their findings for the purpose of taqleed, or reference to the most learned, would be that they would give absolutes and an area of discretion, bearing in mind that, and I know this is an arduous task, and it's a model that it will take a very long time to come, and it needs a lot of work, and it will be slow. But let's say in the case of euthanasia, yes, it will have to take into consideration the variety of euthanasia that is there. Assisted killing, applying of extraordinary life support systems, or choosing not to apply. Or once they applied, the decision of removing them. They would have to give an absolute there. What is an absolute don't? And what is an absolute must? Below that, there is an area of discretion. So long as that individual has a fighting chance to live, give them whatever they need of the life support systems. Provided, of course, it's not crippling the whole community. The costs, yes? They would have to consider all these things and leave it at the discretion of others to then make their minds up and say, well, where do they fall? As opposed to giving strict, hard and fast rules. So, for example, if people are aged and the doctors ask us, well, would you like us to resuscitate them? Here, the decision should be of the family and that individual themselves. That yes or no, because they don't have a fighting chance. It's only a question of prolonging life for the sake of prolonging life. I was in Africa and somebody called me and he said, my mother is dying and I've never forgiven me for this decision, myself for this decision. And he said, the doctors are saying, let her go. And I said, no, we need to sustain life. Yes, this is going back quite a few years. And he said, but the doctor is saying, well, she will suffer kidney failure, then liver failure, then a painful heart failure, and then she will go. I said, we have to sustain life and God can do whatever He wants. It was as it was stated. It happened as the doctor stated. Kidney failure, liver failure, heart failure. A prolonged process of death. So the Ijtihadi model will say, this is the absolute. Don't touch this area. This is an absolute must. This is an absolute must not. Below that, it's your discretion. Yes? You can assess your own situation. I mean, there's some young people who are on highest level of life support and they can't sustain life. There ought to be discretion, therefore, after that, for the medics and the family, that it is not a sin now. It is our choice. And some people say, well, we adamantly keep the life support on and they come through. Alhamdulillah. On many occasions, it just prolongs the process of death. So this is what I'm saying in that model, that there are absolutes and there is an area of discretion, because we have to take our own decisions and learn through them. Now, I always stipulate a yardstick because some people get into a bit of a problem when I say these things. I said the yardstick is this, that whatever of the Sharia does not conflict, yes, with the human condition of growth, like 4 rakat prayers and fasting and so on and so forth, provided it's not an unreasonable fast. An unreasonable fast for me is everything beyond 16, 17 hours. This is unreasonable and totally inconsistent with the ethos of Sharia. Then don't question it. But the law of apostasy that goes against the growth property, question it. It was in a context. So the Ijtihad model would also do that. They would state, well, if the blood money for a female was half of that for a male, the reason has to be, the value has to be that the male is a provider and the loss of a male is a greater loss than the loss of a female who was a carer. So now if the female is a provider, then the blood money should be equal because the loss is equal loss. Yes? It has to bear in mind the context in which the law was framed and what value it was trying to bring about and on what value it was based. That is an arduous process. And they would have to think about all of that. Now, I'm not going to prolong this too much. I just want to give a few examples here. We'll begin with Imam Sadiq Salamullah alayh. As we stated, Imam Sadiq stated that the age of bulugh is 13 as opposed to 9. Yes? And at other places it's at 9 as well. So what are these fluctuations? These fluctuations are Imam Sadiq looking at individuals and subjects in their own context and stipulating the law for them. Again, somebody went to Imam Sadiq and asked about fish, and he read the verse of the Quran. He stated,
that whatever I have made haram for you, I have already told you. The dead animal, blood, swine, anything sacrificed on the name of other than God, so on and so forth. And he recited the verse, and then eat of the produce of the ocean. Allah has not made anything haram. He gave that hadith, yes, that all the marine sea creatures are halal to eat. And then of course at another point he said, well, Ali ibn Abi Talib has been adamant about 4 types of fish, don't eat them. And then finally he said, don't eat scaleless fish as Ali ibn Abi Talib has said. So this is insightful. Why has the Imam given 3 different laws here? But the very first one that he derives is from the Quran. He says the Quran says, whatever is haram, I have already explained to you. The Quran speaks to the Prophet. Yes, it's transmitting the words of the Prophet through the text of the Quran. And eat wholesomely of whatever comes from the sea. This is the first one that he stated. Now, of course, I have a reconciliation of what he stated, and if anybody wants that, I can go through it afterwards. So this is what he stated. As far as the meat of Qurbani was concerned, somebody went to Hajj with the 6th Imam and he stated, can I take the meat out of Mina? And the Imam said, take it. The Imam said, my grandfathers, the Prophet and Ali ibn Abi Talib, were adamant that the meat of Mina ought to stay in Mina to feed the pilgrims that have come and will stay there for 2 nights and 3 days. But because there are many pilgrims and there is a lot of meat because they are affluent now and they can offer the sacrifice as opposed to fasting 3 days at Hajj and 7 days when they return if they can't offer the sacrifice, as the Quran states in Surah Baqarah, take the meat out. So what was he saying? That there is a purpose in that animal. And Allah states this twice in the Quran. فَكُلُوا مِنْهَا وَاتْعَمُوا بَعِسِ الْفَقِيرِ and كَانِ وَالْبَعْتَرِ. Eat from it and feed the poor, feed the one who is content, so on and so forth. But what Imam Sadiq was doing was, he was stating at a value within that hukam that the Prophet and Ali ibn Abi Talib had formulated. Yes, based on Surah Hajj. And he was seeing that now the needs of the Hujjaj within Mina are met with. This will go to waste. Take it out. This proves the point that the ahkam are forms and they can fluctuate. The essence are the values inside them which are designed to serve the needs of people and bring about growth and evolution. The Imam, again, when it came to the issue of the moon, he saw this tension. We have the hadith from Ibn Abbas that somebody from Syria came and he said, we did Eid on this and that day. Ibn Abbas said, well, we saw it in this day, so we will do it on this day. Yes? Imam Sadiq was mindful of what the Prophet has said, right? Nobody knows the Prophet more than Imam Sadiq, salamullah alayhi. When the Prophet said, Sum li ru'ya, waftur li ru'ya. When you see the moon, fast. When you see the moon, open your fast. Yes? Then Imam Sadiq said, do your Eid with Ahlul Salah, with Ahl La ilaha illallah, with Ahl Qibla. Do your Eid with the people of La ilaha illallah, with the people of Qibla, with the people of Salah. He was looking at them in their evolutionary, horizontal, ummah context. And nothing else. Because somebody came to Imam Sadiq and he said, what fast is it? And he said, it's the 4th fast. He said, well, we saw the moon, it's a 5th fast. I can't remember properly, accurately that hadith. But to this effect. So the Imam said, in that case, well, I'll do one qada afterwards. He was relaxed about it. He didn't say, well, I didn't see it, so it wasn't incumbent upon me. He said, well, you saw it, it's fine. The Prophet said, when you see, those people understood, when you see in your own region, I understand as in anybody seeing it in the Muslim Ummah. He did not say, your horizon was different to my horizon. So we see examples of this within the life of Imam Sadiq. Again, we see the hukam of not befriending the Jews and the Christians within the Book of God. But if we look at the context, they were always conspiring to undermine the newly formed, naive Muslim community. It was in a particular context. If that context goes, that law goes. But if we find a group of Muslims undermining the unity of the Ummah, then that hukam will come back that do not befriend them, because they are undermining you and your unity and your growth process. The Quran also has an evolutionary sense within it. The Prophet goes to Medina and the Jews are antagonistic and the non-believer are mocking at him. In Baqarah he is told, Fasfah, pardon them, turn away, it's okay, bear them. After a few verses, the Prophet is told, stand your ground and respond to them. What happened? The Prophet was in a position of weakness. The Prophet acquired stability. And then he was told, now you're stable enough, respond. This is an evolutionary track. The same thing happened to us in the UK. When we went many, many years ago, when we were mocked at, we couldn't openly pray. We were very compromised. We had to pray in the spare rooms and hidden away, or people would laugh at us. Now we demand our human rights. We are in a position of strength. This is evolution at our own level and within the Quran. Now I want to give one or two examples. When it comes to the issue of music, and I don't know why this example comes to the mind always, because I think the people will understand this one more than any other example. The framework, the absolute moral will be that this is the absolute limit that is reprehensible. Lyrics that are belittling social moral values, profane, belittling God, human worth, that's reprehensible. Or music that is damaging if psychologically proven within that ijtihadi model, because you will have psychologists in there as well and musicians in there as well. If it is psychologically damaging, then that is reprehensible. Or if the volume is too high, then that is damaging, then that would be the absolute maybe. Below that, this is the area of discretion. You choose. The onus is upon you. Be responsible enough to make your own decisions. And of course, Muntaziri, the late Muntaziri, had stated that there is relativity in music. What he meant was that different regions understand music differently. So Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan in the UK might be reprehensible, because the gathering that is created during his Qawwali is one of people consuming alcohol, dancing with their men and women dancing, and just an atmosphere that's not conducive to a spiritual being. But in Iran, it is in a very dignified setting, the same music. So it should be allowed in Iran, but not in UK. Matter of fact, based purely on the context, and even that context is an artificial context, but it's there. It's a social context that is there. So in music, you will have the absolute and you will have the discretionary. Yes? And that too will follow the whole law of relativity. Or we have zakat and khums. The state, the Muslim state, needed a taxation system to cater for its need, to cater for the poor, to educate people, to create roads, so on and so forth. Now what I'm stating is that the zakat amount has never been stipulated within the Quran, yes? Ali ibn Abi Talib changed it at some point. The khums has a precedence before Islam. The head of the tribe used to take 1/4. Quran came and lessened it, made it 1/5. But they were all there to serve needs. They were value-based. These things were meant to fluctuate in accordance with the needs. Now, of course, zakat and khums are all very, very valid even now within the existential model, because there are people, there are Muslims in the world that require help. There are people here that require assistance in their education, in their businesses, whatever else they need. And it's a particular law that is incumbent upon us within the existential framework. But But how do we deal with it? Until and unless we have global institutions that can stipulate the percentage each community has to take to give out to other community or to serve the needs of their own community based on that need, until we have full accountability and global institutions, we will ourselves use our discretion and say that this khums or zakat ought to be used in a meaningful way that is productive. So the absolute would be that yes, there is a need to take out in the way of God, and it has to be then dealt with in the most responsible manner, not that we send it to somebody else and there's no accountability and there's no productivity or there is no value in the utility of that wealth. I'm going to finish with one thing that a dear sister asked yesterday, and I realized at that point that we need to be more pragmatic. What we are talking about are future models that need to be established or are in the making. Well, what does anybody do immediately? So I was asked the question of the Hindu food, yes? Consumption of Hindu food. By and large, we do know this, that there is no such thing as human najasa, yes? In the Sharia sense. So there is no human najis person. So we can eat the food of anyone we want, yes? Provided it is not maita, dead animal, khinzir, swine, dam, blood, or that which has been sacrificed on other than the name of God. Yes? Other than that, we know we can eat every meat. Yes, I mean halal we can eat, and halal served by any hand and cooked by any hand we can eat. That we know. But now, there are needs of the community in which the community states, well, look, we need to know these everyday things. And we can't use our discretion in that, and it's quite right. We can't use our discretion. So I would just say, well, look, within the traditional setup, the only requirement is to make reference to the one who knows. Yes? The one who knows can be anybody and be everybody. So if anybody produces evidences and they make sense, then we can follow their opinion, provided they're evidence-based. Or the traditional camp and the marajas that we have, we can choose and do partiality of taqlid, A, B, and C. But we can't go to B if we know that A is the most learned in the issue in which I wish to follow B, because then that's contrary and inconsistent with reason. Yes? So if I feel and if I know that A is the most competent in issue X, then I would not be able to make reference rationally to B in issue X, who is not most competent in that issue. So provided that is unknown, within the traditional setup, legitimately, I mean, you can read the views of Sayyid Khoi, Sayyid Khomeini, Sayyid Sistani. I know a few of them are against this based on the principle of continuity, but that argument is extremely weak, but very prominent scholars subscribe to that argument. It's extremely weak. But the likes of Khoi and Khomeini and Sayyid Sistani, they all say, and like Mohsen al-Hakim, that the whole commitment to the mujtahid by an individual in itself is the discretion of the individual, and they can pick and choose provided they do not know that who is the most learned in that issue. So pragmatic reasons, within the traditional camp, people can pick and choose, it's fine. And there are many scholars out there right now who are understanding the needs of the modern world and the global human community, and their fatwas are falling in line with the realistic human existence in the wider world. For example, we had a very revolutionary thinker, Sayyid Fadlullah, we have Yusuf Sana'i, we had Hadi Marifat, who died a few years ago, and there are many, many more. So, for pragmatic purposes, this option is also allowed. And I shall stop there and entertain thoughts from the floor. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.